One of the big reasons hip mobility stuff doesn't stick is often because the feet have no concept of understanding how to use the new movement and strength that you've developed from the hip mobility work. And a simple way to understand this is the difference between open chain movements and closed chain movements. So in this video, I'm going to give you a couple of different examples of those two different types of movements so that you can start to experiment with some closed chain stuff and some softer hip movement that requires less effort, more mental focus, and much better outcomes that stick. So we might start this off by just talking about why muscles get tight in the first place. How I like to think about this is that tightness and tension comes from the body as a protective mechanism. You can think about tightness as your body trying to reduce movement to prevent you from going into a range of motion or a particular joint angle that your brain and your central nervous system doesn't quite trust you in enough yet, whether that's with speed or the range of motion that you're getting into. Your body's just not quite prepared for that. It's not familiar with it, so it tightens the muscle to protect you. So thinking about it this way is a really nice way to open this conversation with the body. And you can say, okay, the body is trying to protect me. There's nothing wrong here, but we just need to educate. We need to work together to allow that nice, smooth movement. A lot of the hip mobility work that we have people do is really encouraging them to move with as little effort as possible, rather than using this muscular tension all the time to try and force yourself into a position. You're actually trying to really melt the muscle and soften everything. So you end up with these like honey-like hips that move really smoothly and really easily without creating a lot of this accessory tension. Because a lot of times what I see is when people go into standard hip mobility stuff, which is great. Like we have a lot of standard hip mobility sequences on our app, but a lot of the time those are open chain movements. And what happens is the second that you put your foot on the floor and you move your center of mass over onto that foot, if your body doesn't trust you in that position, it's going to tighten everything back up again, which is why a lot of people have to maintain this constant level of hip stretching and hip mobility just to maintain their function. But actually, if they were to slow down, do closed chain movements, and learn to move the hips effortlessly without that tension, then they probably wouldn't have to be doing it all the time just to maintain that base level of function. Now, when people mention hip mobility, usually what they're talking about is how the femur rotates inside the hip socket, and they're completely ignoring the rest of the hip girdle, what happens at the back side here. So a lot of the time you can gain a lot of permanent hip mobility by using the sacral iliac joint and learning how to move that independently and not just working on the femoral hip joint. So where I like to start with people when I'm teaching them how to use the hips again is to use closed chain movements that get that sacroiliac joint moving in a lot of different ways. So what is a closed chain movement? A closed chain movement basically just means that your foot has the floor to work with, whereas in an open chain movement, the foot can be kind of flopping around all over the place. We'll give you a good example. You know the classic clamshells exercise that every physio in the world loves to just spam people with as soon as they have like hip or knee problems? That typically is an open chain movement where your feet are just kind of flopping around on the ground. But if you were to put your feet onto a wall and do the same movement, in my mind and in our system, that is a much more effective movement because your feet are in contact with something. They can perceive that as the ground. And then they know how to use the new movement that you're giving the body when you do an exercise like the clamshells. It's not that open chain movements are bad, it's just nice to have a good mix of both open and closed chain stuff when you're working with tricky foot, knee and hip issues. So we like to start people off with a lot of these closed chain movements like scissor slides, adductor pullbacks, 90-90 knee rolls, and using the breath to move the pelvis is a big one as well, and it's probably the most important. And for sure, the long-term solution to maintain hips that can move really well, hips that can get into lots of different joint angles and to express movement is to add firstly speed and then strength and then coordination and reaction time into those movements. And then when you're able to express those things without all these super long warm-ups and a whole list of mobility drills. You're able to just get in and do the movement with very little warm-up, and your body remembers how to do it. And there's no need for that protection mechanism. If what I'm saying here about hip mobility is resonating and you want to try out some of these movements, we have a 14-day hip challenge. It's called the Daily Hinge. Over 14 days, you'll be learning some of the concepts at a deeper level that I'm talking about here. We give you access to all the drills, and there's an opportunity for you to interact with us and ask questions. So that's on our app. It's the first link in the description. And also, if you scan this QR code here with your phone, you'll be directed immediately to our app where you can start the Daily Hinge. So this would be a really great first step into understanding my system of movement for hikers called the Hike Flow method. We have 4 phases of movement that would typically be done over a 3 to 6 month period, where we take injury prone hikers and teach them how to move their body again. Regular old clamshells, you'll be grabbing the booty band, the bright pink booty band from the missus, and you'll be doing this kind of action. Now, people love this because they're like, oh, I can really feel my glute med. That's a fine exercise and that's a nice feeling, but the feet don't really know how to use that because this is an open chain. Put your feet on a wall, or to your feet, that's the floor. Do a similar thing and you'll probably get a lot more out of it. Now pay attention to your foot contacts. Can you feel your foot tripod on the floor? Pay attention to the shape that your foot is making as you're abducting the hip. Second small change that you can make. People with tight hips love these. They're always using them. There's a much better way that you can use this without trigger pointing or releasing anything. Set up in that side lying position with your feet on the wall. Place the foam roller between your knees and now try to move the top knee forward and back. Pay attention to what is happening in your feet. Maintain those foot contacts. Don't overuse your lower back. Keep the lower back quiet and simply try and shift the pelvis and the weight from one side to the other with as little muscular effort as possible. Yeah, that's about it for this one. If you learned something, share your learning in the comments and I will see you on the summit.